The first crack sounded like a gunshot across the quiet streets of Arlington, Virginia. Afternoon conversations stopped instantly. Coffee cups froze halfway to waiting lips. Heads turned toward a black luxury SUV parked beside a busy sidewalk cafe. Officer Bradley Jenkins stood beside the vehicle, gripping his baton tightly. His jaw clenched with irritation that had little to do with police work. The expensive Mercedes G-Wagon reflected sunlight across nearby storefront windows. To Jenkins, the vehicle represented everything he believed life had unfairly denied him. Inside sat Marcus Bennett, a 42-year-old Army colonel assigned to the Pentagon. His tailored Navy suit fit perfectly. His posture remained calm despite the escalating hostility outside his window. Years of military service had trained him to remain composed during chaos. "Step out of the vehicle," Jenkins barked. Marcus slowly lowered his window. His voice remained respectful. "Officer, may I ask why I've been stopped today?" The question only irritated Jenkins further. "Don't play games with me. Vehicles like this don't magically appear. Let's see some identification." Marcus handed over his driver's license and registration without hesitation. Around them, curious pedestrians slowed their pace. Several quietly raised their phones. The neighborhood sat only minutes from the Pentagon. Military officers, defense contractors, and federal employees frequently passed through the area. Yet Jenkins barely noticed those details. He focused entirely on the image before him. A successful black man driving a vehicle worth more than his annual salary. That image stirred something bitter inside him. Marcus watched silently as Jenkins examined the paperwork. Every document was valid. Registration matched the vehicle. Insurance coverage was current. Ownership records were flawless. Still, Jenkins frowned. His radio crackled softly. Nearby traffic rolled past beneath a bright Virginia sky. A light breeze carried the smell of fresh coffee from the cafe patio. Among the customers sat Captain Rachel Torres, another Pentagon officer enjoying a late afternoon break. She immediately recognized Marcus. They had attended security briefings together for nearly 2 years. Something about the interaction felt wrong. Without drawing attention, she activated her phone camera. Across the street, retired schoolteacher Evelyn Parker paused while walking her golden retriever. She watched with growing concern. Inside the coffee shop, barista Jordan Ellis glanced through the front window. He recognized Marcus as one of the kindest regular customers. The colonel visited several times each week, always polite and generous. Jenkins suddenly opened the driver's door. "Out. Now." Marcus complied immediately. His movements were deliberate and calm. Military discipline guided every action. That calmness only fueled Jenkins's frustration. "You're awfully comfortable for someone driving a suspicious vehicle," Jenkins said. Marcus met his gaze evenly. "Because I haven't done anything wrong, officer." The crowd slowly grew. Several phones recorded continuously. A second patrol vehicle arrived after Jenkins requested backup. Young Officer Emily Carter stepped out and immediately sensed tension hanging in the air. Her father had served 25 years in the Army. Marcus's bearing felt instantly familiar, professional, disciplined, controlled. Nothing about him resembled the criminal Jenkins seemed determined to find. Jenkins began searching the vehicle. Documents, folders, and personal belongings emerged one after another. Then he found a leather case. Inside rested military decorations earned during overseas deployments. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Those medals represented sacrifices made by friends who never came home. Jenkins barely glanced at them. "Interesting collection," he muttered sarcastically. The crowd exchanged uneasy looks. Captain Torres lowered her phone slightly. She already knew something dangerous was unfolding. Not danger from Marcus, danger from assumptions. As sunlight reflected across the polished hood of the Mercedes, Marcus's phone began vibrating inside the vehicle. One call followed another. Pentagon offices, military staff, government contacts. Important calls connected to a classified congressional briefing scheduled for the next morning. Jenkins ignored every ring. He looked at Marcus as if he had already decided the entire story. And somewhere deep inside, he had. What nobody standing on that Arlington sidewalk realized was that the next hour would trigger a chain of events reaching from a local police department all the way to the halls of Congress. The first unanswered call came from a three-star general. The second call from General Thomas Morrison arrived less than 3 minutes later. Then came another, and another. Each vibration echoed from inside the Mercedes, while Officer Bradley Jenkins continued searching through Marcus Bennett's belongings with growing confidence. To Jenkins, every unanswered call strengthened his theory. In his mind, sophisticated criminals often created elaborate stories. Expensive cars, fake credentials, impressive contacts, everything could be fabricated. Marcus stood quietly beside the patrol car. His hands remained visible, his breathing remained steady. Years earlier, during combat deployments in Afghanistan, he had learned a simple truth. Panic never improves a bad situation. Across the street, more people gathered. Several had already begun posting videos online. Short clips appeared on social media showing a Black Army veteran being aggressively questioned beside a luxury vehicle. Most viewers lacked context. They simply sensed something felt wrong. Officer Emily Carter watched Jenkins pull documents from a secure leather portfolio. Her concern deepened. "Brad," she said carefully, "maybe we should verify some of this before escalating." Jenkins barely looked up. "Escalating? I'm investigating a felony." Emily glanced at Marcus. His posture never changed. No sudden movements, no arguments, no hostility. The behavior resembled senior military officers she had known throughout childhood. Inside the coffee shop, Captain Rachel Torres continued recording. Every minute added more evidence. Every word mattered. Jenkins eventually opened a dark folder resting on the passenger seat. His eyes narrowed. Several official government documents appeared inside. The pages contained security markings, briefing schedules, and committee references. Marcus immediately spoke. "Officer, those materials contain sensitive information. Please handle them carefully." The warning produced the opposite reaction. "Sensitive information?" Jenkins laughed. He lifted several pages into the air. "You mean fake government paperwork?" A sudden gust of wind swept through the parking area. Loose pages fluttered across the pavement. Marcus felt genuine alarm for the first time. The documents related to an upcoming congressional briefing involving national security matters. Nothing on the pages would endanger lives immediately. Still, their careless exposure violated multiple protocols. "Officer, please," Marcus said. "Those documents need to be secured." Jenkins ignored him. Instead, he held one page toward the growing crowd. "Looks official, doesn't it?" A few people exchanged uncomfortable glances. No one laughed. Jordan Ellis finally stepped outside the coffee shop. His hands trembled slightly. Challenging police officers publicly carried risks, but remaining silent felt worse. "Officer," Jordan said respectfully, "I've known that gentleman for months. He comes here regularly. He's always professional." Jenkins turned sharply. "Nobody asked for your opinion." The response shocked several witnesses. Jordan stepped back. Rachel Torres captured everything on video. Nearby, Evelyn Parker quietly began taking notes. Old teaching habits never disappeared. Names, times, actions, details. She wrote everything. Marcus's phone continued ringing. A text message appeared on the screen. "Call immediately. National security issue." Then another. Then a third. Jenkins finally picked up the phone. The caller ID displayed General Morrison's direct office. "Quite a creative contact list," Jenkins said. He tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The crowd's mood shifted noticeably. People no longer looked curious. They looked disturbed. Officer Carter felt the same way. Every instinct warned her that this situation was moving toward disaster. She quietly activated her own body camera backup system. If mistakes were being made, documentation would matter. Soon additional patrol units arrived. Flashing lights painted the quiet Arlington street with red and blue reflections. What should have been a brief traffic stop now resembled a major criminal investigation. Residents emerged from nearby buildings. Phones multiplied. Videos spread. Online comments accelerated. Questions appeared. Why was this man being detained? What crime had occurred? Why did the officer seem so aggressive? Jenkins remained convinced he was becoming the hero of the story. In reality, the story was already slipping beyond his control. At the Pentagon, security officials noticed Colonel Marcus Bennett had missed a mandatory communications check. That almost never happened. Within minutes, a formal inquiry began. and the first call to Arlington Police Department dispatch was placed. The call from the Pentagon reached Arlington Police Dispatch at exactly 3:47 p.m. Dispatcher Melissa Grant listened carefully as a calm military voice spoke. "This is Pentagon Security Operations. We're attempting to locate Colonel Marcus Bennett. He has missed a mandatory communications check related to tomorrow's congressional briefing. Has your department had any contact with him today?" Melissa's fingers paused above her keyboard. She quickly searched active police activity logs. Her expression changed instantly. There it was, traffic stop. Officer Bradley Jenkins, active detention, luxury vehicle investigation. "Please hold," she said. Outside, the situation continued deteriorating. Marcus remained standing beside the patrol vehicle while Jenkins intensified his search. Personal items now covered portions of the sidewalk. Military records, travel documents, financial statements, and briefing schedules sat exposed beneath curious eyes. Officer Emily Carter felt increasingly uncomfortable. Nothing she observed supported Jenkins's theory. Every document appeared legitimate. Every response from Marcus remained respectful. Every minute seemed to reveal more evidence that the wrong person was being treated like a criminal. Yet Jenkins refused to reconsider. "We're done talking," he announced. "Place your hands behind your back." The crowd fell silent. Marcus looked directly at him. "Am I being arrested?" "You are being detained pending further investigation." The distinction meant little. Metal handcuffs clicked shut around Marcus's wrists. Several people gasped. Phones captured every second. Jordan Ellis lowered his head in disbelief. Evelyn Parker wrote furiously in her notebook. Captain Rachel Torres immediately sent an encrypted message to a Pentagon colleague. The message contained only 6 words. "Marcus Bennett has been detained." Across Arlington, events accelerated. Inside police headquarters, Dispatcher Grant contacted Lieutenant Robert Murphy. "Sir, Pentagon Security is asking about a Colonel Marcus Bennett." Murphy frowned. "Why?" "Apparently he's involved in congressional testimony tomorrow. They're requesting immediate confirmation of his status." Murphy's stomach tightened. Congressional testimony. That phrase alone carried weight. He opened the incident report. The arresting officer's name appeared. Bradley Jenkins. Murphy sighed. Jenkins had generated complaints before, not enough for serious discipline, enough to create concern. Meanwhile, Marcus was guided toward the patrol vehicle. The crowd watched silently. No resistance, no struggle, no threats, just a decorated military officer being led away in handcuffs. Jenkins seemed energized by the attention. "This is how law enforcement works," he announced loudly. "Nobody gets special treatment." The statement sounded noble, but several witnesses understood the deeper truth. Marcus had not received equal treatment. He had received different treatment, because assumptions had been made long before evidence was examined. As Marcus entered the patrol car, his phone rang again. General Morrison. For the 7th time. Jenkins smirked. Persistent fake contacts. Officer Carter stared at the screen. Something bothered her. The number format looked authentic. Very authentic. She made a mental note. Back at headquarters, Lieutenant Murphy requested a simple verification, a basic military credential check. The process normally required only a few minutes. He expected clarification. Instead, he received a shock. The database returned an immediate match. Colonel Marcus Bennett. Active duty, United States Army. Top-level security clearance. Multiple combat deployments. Recipient of the Medal of Honor. Murphy stared at the screen, then checked again. Same result. His face turned pale. He picked up the phone instantly. "Get Jenkins on the radio, right now." Outside, the patrol convoy began moving toward the station. Marcus sat quietly in the back seat. Traffic rolled past beneath gathering clouds. The first signs of an approaching storm darkened the horizon. For a brief moment, he closed his eyes. He thought about tomorrow's congressional testimony. Months of preparation, national security recommendations, military families depending on effective policy decisions, all now jeopardized by one officer's assumptions. His thoughts were interrupted by another radio transmission. Jenkins listened casually. Then his expression changed. "Unit 47, dispatch said. Lieutenant Murphy requests immediate contact. Priority status." For the first time all afternoon, uncertainty entered Jenkins's mind. Far behind the convoy, social media videos continued spreading across the country. Millions of viewers had not yet seen the truth. But the truth was moving toward Arlington Police Department faster than anyone imagined. And Lieutenant Murphy had just discovered the first piece. Lieutenant Robert Murphy did not wait for Jenkins to return to the station. He called directly. "Jenkins, where are you?" The tone alone made Jenkins uneasy. "En route to headquarters with the suspect." "The suspect has a name." "Colonel Marcus Bennett, active duty Army, Medal of Honor recipient, verified through military databases 5 minutes ago." Silence filled the patrol car. For a moment, even the radio seemed quiet. Jenkins tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "There has to be a mistake." "There isn't." Murphy's voice hardened. "Listen carefully. The Pentagon has called multiple times. Congressional staff have called. General Morrison's office has called. Whatever happened during this stop, we need answers immediately." The line disconnected. Jenkins stared through the windshield. Rain clouds had fully covered the afternoon sun. The world suddenly felt different. Officer Emily Carter followed in the second patrol vehicle. She noticed Jenkins slowing unexpectedly. For the first time that day, he looked uncertain. Meanwhile, inside the back seat, Marcus remained composed. He had spent years leading soldiers through life-threatening situations. He understood something many civilians never learned. Truth often moved slowly, but eventually it arrived. At police headquarters, tension spread rapidly. Dispatchers whispered. Supervisors checked databases. Phones rang non-stop. Pentagon officials demanded updates. Congressional aides requested explanations. Department administrators suddenly found themselves answering questions they could not yet explain. Chief Patricia Patterson received her first briefing while attending a city meeting across town. The moment she heard the words Medal of Honor recipient, her expression darkened. "Tell me exactly what happened," she ordered. Nobody could. Not yet. The patrol vehicles finally arrived. Marcus stepped out calmly. The handcuffs remained secured. Employees throughout the station looked up as he entered. Several immediately noticed his bearing. Military discipline seemed visible in every movement. Desk Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez watched closely. Her husband had served 20 years in the Marine Corps. She recognized authentic service almost instantly. "Name?" she asked. "Colonel Marcus Bennett, United States Army." Jenkins laughed nervously. "That's the story he's sticking with." Rodriguez glanced toward him. Something about the comment felt wrong, very wrong. The intake process began. Fingerprints, identification review, basic verification procedures. Then Marcus's phone buzzed again. Rodriguez looked down. Her eyes widened. General Thomas Morrison, Department of Defense. The caller information appeared authentic. Not fabricated, not suspicious, authentic. She immediately carried the phone to Murphy's office. The lieutenant answered personally. The voice on the other end carried unmistakable authority. "This is General Morrison. I need to know why one of my senior officers is currently in police custody." Murphy felt a knot tighten in his chest. The situation had officially become catastrophic. Across the building, Jenkins completed paperwork with growing frustration. Every new piece of information contradicted his assumptions. Yet he clung desperately to them. People like Marcus weren't supposed to fit the story he had written in his mind. Not according to his worldview, not according to his biases. Then the military credential report arrived. Printed. Official. Undeniable. Rodriguez placed the file on Murphy's desk. The document stretched more than 20 pages. Combat deployments, leadership assignments, security clearances, commendations, national defense awards, and one distinction that stood above all others, Medal of Honor recipient. Murphy closed his eyes briefly. The room felt heavier with every page. At that exact moment, Chief Patterson entered the station. Rain began falling outside, hard, cold, relentless. She walked directly into Murphy's office. "Tell me this isn't true," she said. Murphy slid the military file across the desk. She read silently. 30 seconds later, her face lost all color. "Where is Colonel Bennett now?" "Holding Area 3. Patterson stood immediately. "And Officer Jenkins?" "Processing reports." The chief looked through the office window toward the booking area. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. By tomorrow morning, this story will be national news. Neither officer argued. They both knew she was right. Outside, rain hammered against the station windows. Inside, the foundations of several careers had already begun collapsing. The only question remaining was how much damage would be revealed when the complete truth finally surfaced. Chief Patricia Patterson moved through the station with the speed of someone racing a disaster she could already see unfolding. Every officer stepped aside. Every conversation stopped. The atmosphere inside Arlington Police Headquarters had completely changed. An hour earlier, most employees believed a major criminal arrest was being processed. Now they were discovering something far different. A decorated Army colonel sat in a holding cell, and the department itself had become the problem. Patterson reached holding area 3. Through the glass, Marcus Bennett sat quietly on a metal bench. His suit remained wrinkled from the arrest. His expression remained calm. The chief paused. 20 years in law enforcement had taught her how people behaved under stress. Criminals often showed fear, anger, or desperation. Marcus showed none of those things. He looked like a man waiting for a delayed flight. She unlocked the door personally. "Colonel Bennett," she said. Marcus stood immediately. "Chief Patterson." Even after everything that had happened, his tone remained respectful. That somehow made the situation worse. "Colonel, I owe you an apology." Marcus studied her for a moment. "I assume my identity has been verified?" The chief nodded, several times. Outside the holding area, Lieutenant Murphy waited with a growing stack of reports. Pentagon officials continued calling. Congressional staff continued demanding explanations. Media inquiries had begun arriving every few minutes. The story was spreading. Fast. Patterson looked directly at Marcus. "General Morrison has requested confirmation of your well-being. The Pentagon is extremely concerned." Marcus exhaled slowly. "Tomorrow's testimony involves months of preparation. Missing communications checks triggered automatic security protocols." The chief nodded. Every answer she received only highlighted the magnitude of the failure. Meanwhile, Officer Bradley Jenkins sat inside Murphy's office. His confidence had vanished, yet denial remained. "There has to be another explanation," he insisted. "Maybe someone helped him create the records." Murphy stared at him in disbelief. "The Department of Defense verified everything." "Maybe the databases—" "Stop," Murphy's voice cut through the room. "Just stop." For the first time, Jenkins fell silent. The lieutenant opened Marcus's military file. Page after page revealed accomplishments Jenkins had never imagined. Combat deployments, leadership commands, security assignments, decorations earned under enemy fire. Then came the citation, the Medal of Honor. Murphy pushed the document across the desk. "Read it." Jenkins reluctantly complied. The citation described a battle in Afghanistan 12 years earlier. A convoy ambush, multiple casualties, heavy enemy fire. Marcus had repeatedly exposed himself to danger while evacuating wounded soldiers. 30 lives had been saved. Several survivors later testified they would be dead without him. The room became painfully quiet. Outside, rain continued striking the windows. Inside, reality settled heavily onto everyone's shoulders. Officer Emily Carter entered, carrying additional documentation. "Chief," she said, "we completed verification on the Mercedes." Patterson looked up. "And? Purchased legally 3 years ago, paid primarily through accumulated deployment bonuses and military compensation. Every financial record checks out." Another assumption collapsed. Another piece of evidence destroyed Jenkins's narrative. The luxury vehicle had not been stolen. It had been earned. Marcus purchased it with money accumulated during years spent serving in combat zones. Money earned while protecting the country. The irony was brutal. By early evening, national media outlets had begun broadcasting preliminary reports. Video footage emerged online. Viewers watched Jenkins dismiss military credentials. They watched him mock official documents. They watched him arrest a calm, compliant officer without evidence of criminal activity. Public reaction exploded. Veterans organizations released statements. Military families expressed outrage. Civil rights groups demanded accountability. The hashtags began trending nationwide. Justice for Marcus. Respect our veterans. Accountability now. Back inside the station, Chief Patterson made her decision. She returned to the holding area. Marcus stood when she entered. "Colonel Bennett," she said, "you are being released immediately." The words echoed through the room. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. Then Patterson continued, "Your vehicle will be returned. Your property will be secured. An internal affairs investigation begins tonight." Marcus nodded. No celebration, no anger, no victory speech. Only quiet dignity. "Thank you, Chief." Patterson handed him his phone. The screen displayed dozens of missed calls. Generals, Pentagon officials, congressional staff, national security personnel, an entire network of responsibilities waiting for him. Marcus glanced at the notifications, then looked toward the booking area. His eyes briefly met Jenkins's. The officer immediately looked away. For the first time all day, Bradley Jenkins fully understood what he had done. And somewhere deep inside, fear finally replaced certainty. Because outside the station doors, reporters were already arriving. By sunrise the following morning, Arlington had become the center of a national story. Satellite trucks lined the streets outside police headquarters. Reporters gathered beneath gray skies, carrying microphones and cameras. Every major network wanted answers. How had a decorated Army colonel ended up handcuffed during a routine traffic stop? Why had clear evidence been ignored, and who would be held responsible? Inside his Arlington home, Marcus Bennett prepared for the day ahead. Despite sleeping only a few hours, he appeared composed. His military uniform hung neatly beside the bedroom window. The silver eagle insignia of a full colonel reflected the early morning light. Marcus adjusted his tie carefully. The congressional testimony still mattered. National security still mattered. His responsibilities had not disappeared simply because his life had been turned upside down. Across town, Bradley Jenkins sat alone in an internal affairs interview room. The walls felt smaller than usual. The silence felt heavier. Television coverage played continuously on a mounted screen. Every channel showed the same footage. His words, his decisions. Viewed now through the lens of complete truth. For the first time, he saw what everyone else saw. Not a heroic arrest, a public collapse of judgment, a dangerous mixture of assumptions, resentment, and authority. Internal affairs. Captain Monica Walsh entered carrying a thick folder. She placed it on the table. "This interview is being recorded," she said. Jenkins nodded quietly. The folder contained witness statements, video evidence, body camera recordings, dispatch logs, military verification documents, and perhaps most damaging of all, the timeline. A minute-by-minute reconstruction of everything that happened. The evidence showed that Jenkins had decided Marcus was suspicious before conducting any meaningful investigation. The facts came later. The judgment came first. That detail changed everything. Meanwhile, at the Pentagon, senior officials met behind closed doors. The previous afternoon's events had triggered serious concerns. Congressional staff questioned whether law enforcement actions could interfere with national security operations. Military leadership worried about the broader implications. General Morrison addressed the room. "This is not simply about Colonel Bennett." His voice remained calm but firm. "This concerns every service member who wears the uniform and expects fair treatment while serving their country." Heads nodded throughout the conference room. The issue had grown larger than one arrest, much larger. Back in Arlington, Officer Emily Carter reviewed her own body camera footage. She watched the stop unfold again. Every assumption, every missed opportunity, every moment where the situation could have been corrected. The experience left her unsettled. Police officers possessed enormous authority. With that authority came responsibility. When responsibility failed, consequences spread far beyond a single incident. The realization stayed with her. Shortly before noon, Marcus arrived at the Capitol. Television cameras followed his vehicle. Journalists crowded nearby sidewalks. Questions flew from every direction. "Colonel Bennett, do you plan legal action? Do you believe race played a role? What would you say to Officer Jenkins?" Marcus stopped briefly. The crowd fell silent. His answer surprised many people. "What happened yesterday should never happen to anyone," he said. "But real progress comes from accountability and improvement, not anger." My focus remains serving this country and helping ensure mistakes like this become less likely in the future. The statement immediately spread across national media. Commentators praised his restraint. Veterans groups highlighted his professionalism. Even some critics found themselves impressed. Inside the hearing room, congressional leaders greeted Marcus warmly. Several personally expressed concern. Others offered support. Yet as the testimony began, Marcus shifted his attention entirely back to the mission. Hours passed. Questions were answered. Recommendations were presented. Policy discussions moved forward. The country continued functioning. But outside the hearing room, another story continued developing. Internal Affairs investigators had begun examining Officer Jenkins's history, and what they were finding would transform a single incident into something far more troubling. By late afternoon, Captain Walsh discovered a pattern hidden beneath years of paperwork. A pattern nobody could ignore any longer. Captain Monica Walsh spent the next 48 hours buried beneath records, complaint files, and traffic stop reports. What began as a review of one disastrous arrest slowly evolved into something much larger, something systemic, something uncomfortable. Her investigators assembled data from the previous 3 years. Patterns emerged almost immediately. Certain neighborhoods, certain vehicles, certain drivers. Again and again, Officer Bradley Jenkins appeared at the center. By Friday morning, Walsh sat in a conference room studying charts projected across a large screen. The statistics painted a troubling picture. While patrolling Arlington's wealthiest districts, Jenkins stopped minority drivers at significantly higher rates than other officers working the same areas. The disparity was impossible to ignore. No single stop proved misconduct. Together, however, they revealed something deeper: bias. Whether conscious or unconscious no longer mattered. The results were visible, and now there was evidence. How did nobody catch this earlier? One investigator asked. Walsh closed the file slowly. Because everyone reviewed incidents individually. Nobody looked at the entire pattern. Across town, Arlington residents were asking similar questions. Community meetings filled beyond capacity. Veterans groups demanded accountability. Civil rights organizations called for independent oversight. Even longtime supporters of the department expressed concern. Trust, once damaged, proved difficult to repair. Meanwhile, Marcus Bennett returned to his normal duties, at least outwardly. Internally, the experience lingered. He found himself replaying moments from the traffic stop. The assumptions, the accusations, the certainty in Jenkins's voice. None of it reflected evidence. It reflected expectation. That realization disturbed him more than the arrest itself. Late Friday afternoon, Marcus visited Arlington National Cemetery. The sky hung low with heavy clouds. Rows of white headstones stretched across rolling green hills. Silence dominated the landscape. Marcus often came here when life became complicated. The cemetery offered perspective. Every marker represented sacrifice, duty, service, values larger than individual frustrations. Standing among the graves of fallen soldiers, Marcus reflected on leadership. Leadership was not about authority. Authority alone could arrest someone. Leadership required discipline, humility, self-awareness. Without those qualities, power became dangerous. His thoughts were interrupted by a call from General Morrison. "How are you holding up?" the general asked. Marcus smiled faintly. "I've survived worse days. The investigation is expanding." "I heard." The general paused. "You understand this isn't just about you anymore." Marcus looked across the endless rows of memorial stones. "I know." And he did. The story had become larger than any individual. Across the country, military families were discussing it. Police departments were reviewing procedures. Community leaders were debating reform. One traffic stop had triggered a national conversation. Back at Internal Affairs, investigators uncovered another troubling discovery. Over the previous 8 years, Jenkins had accumulated multiple citizen complaints. Most had been dismissed. Others received minor warnings. None resulted in meaningful intervention. Viewed separately, they seemed insignificant. Viewed together, they formed a clear warning that had gone unanswered. Captain Walsh added the findings to her growing report. The document had already exceeded 200 pages. Every section strengthened the same conclusion. The arrest of Marcus Bennett was not an isolated mistake. It was the inevitable result of problems allowed to grow unchecked. That evening, Chief Patterson received Walsh's preliminary findings. She read long into the night. Each page deepened her concern, not only about Jenkins, about the department itself. Failures rarely belong to one person alone. Systems either corrected problems or enabled them. In this case, warning signs had existed for years. Nobody acted decisively. Now the consequences were visible nationwide. Near midnight, Patterson looked out her office window toward the quiet city below. Rain had returned. Streetlights reflected across wet pavement. For the first time since the incident began, she accepted a difficult truth. Removing one officer would not solve the problem. Real reform would require confronting failures at every level. And somewhere inside Captain Walsh's growing investigation sat evidence that could threaten careers far beyond Bradley Jenkins. The next phase of the inquiry was about to expose just how deep those failures truly went. 1 week after the arrest, Arlington felt different. Not quieter, more attentive. People who had never attended community meetings suddenly filled public forums. Residents who once ignored local government began reading investigation updates. Police accountability, civil rights, and public trust dominated conversations throughout the city. The incident had become impossible to forget. And Captain Monica Walsh's investigation continued uncovering uncomfortable truths. Her final review expanded beyond Officer Bradley Jenkins. Supervisors were questioned, training records were examined, complaint procedures were audited. The findings revealed repeated opportunities for intervention that had been ignored. Early warnings existed, patterns existed, complaints existed, yet meaningful action never came. The problem was larger than one officer. It was a system that had mistaken inaction for stability. Meanwhile, Marcus Bennett found himself becoming something he never wanted to be. A public symbol, requests for interviews arrived daily. National organizations invited him to speak. Universities requested appearances. Veterans groups asked him to address conferences. Marcus accepted only a few. His focus remained service. But he understood the responsibility. People listened because his story revealed something important. Success did not protect someone from assumptions. Achievement did not erase prejudice. Even military honors could be overlooked when others refused to see beyond stereotypes. One Thursday evening, Marcus attended a town hall meeting organized by local leaders. The auditorium filled quickly. Police officers sat beside veterans. Business owners sat beside students. Military families filled entire rows. Everyone wanted answers. Chief Patricia Patterson stood first. She faced the audience without prepared notes. "Our department failed," she said. The room became silent. "We failed Colonel Bennett. We failed this community, and we failed to address warning signs that should have been recognized much earlier." Some residents nodded, others remained skeptical. Trust, once broken, required more than words. Patterson understood that. Then Marcus approached the podium. The audience immediately quieted. For several seconds, he simply looked across the room, at the officers, at the families, at the people who wanted certainty in an uncertain moment. "I spent much of my career working alongside soldiers from every background imaginable," Marcus began. "Different races, different religions, different political beliefs. What mattered was trust, because trust keeps people alive." The audience listened carefully. Communities work the same way. Without trust, everything becomes harder. Every interaction, every decision, every relationship. His voice remained calm, steady, measured. Accountability matters because trust matters. They cannot exist separately. The room erupted into applause, not because his words were dramatic, because they felt true. Across the city, reform efforts accelerated. Independent oversight policies moved forward. Bias awareness programs expanded. New data monitoring systems were approved. Departments from neighboring jurisdictions requested copies of Arlington's proposed changes. The story was no longer simply about what went wrong. It was becoming a case study in how institutions respond after failure. But not everyone welcomed the changes. Inside a federal building several miles away, attorneys reviewed evidence gathered by internal affairs. The investigation had attracted the attention of federal prosecutors. Civil rights specialists examined video footage. Witness testimony, body camera recordings, traffic stop data, complaint histories. The evidence was substantial, very substantial. Late Friday afternoon, Chief Patterson received a confidential phone call. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. When it ended, she remained seated in silence. The federal government had reached a decision. Criminal charges were now being considered, not administrative discipline, not policy recommendations. Criminal prosecution. The consequences facing Bradley Jenkins had just become far more serious. Outside her office window, the city continued moving through another ordinary evening. Cars traveled crowded streets, restaurants filled with customers, families returned home. Most people remained unaware of what was coming. But Chief Patterson understood. The next chapter would no longer focus on departmental reform. It would focus on justice. And the federal government was preparing to enter the story. 3 weeks after Marcus Bennett's arrest, the Federal Review concluded. The decision arrived quietly. No dramatic press conference, no advance warning. Just an official notification delivered simultaneously to Arlington Police Department leadership, city attorneys, and federal investigators. Federal prosecutors would move forward. Bradley Jenkins would face criminal civil rights charges. The announcement spread rapidly. National media outlets interrupted regular programming. Veterans organizations released statements within minutes. Legal experts appeared on television explaining the significance. Federal prosecutions involving police officers remained relatively rare. The evidence in this case had crossed an important threshold. Inside a conference room at police headquarters, Chief Patricia Patterson addressed department leadership. Nobody appeared surprised. The investigation had been thorough. The video evidence had been overwhelming. The witness testimony had been remarkably consistent. Most importantly, the facts never changed. Marcus Bennett committed no crime, yet he had been treated like a dangerous suspect. The consequences now followed naturally. Across town, Bradley Jenkins sat with his attorney. The confidence that once defined him had disappeared entirely. He looked exhausted. Older. Smaller somehow. The attorney reviewed possible outcomes. Federal charges, civil liability, financial consequences, permanent loss of law enforcement certification. Every scenario carried life-altering implications. Jenkins listened quietly. For the first time, he could no longer blame supervisors, or politicians, or media coverage. The evidence came from his own actions, his own words, his own decisions, recorded from multiple angles, preserved forever. Meanwhile, Marcus returned to Arlington for another community event. The atmosphere felt noticeably different from only a few weeks earlier. Residents approached him with gratitude. Veterans shook his hand. Students asked thoughtful questions. Many people wanted to know how he remained calm throughout the ordeal. Marcus often gave the same answer. Discipline is easiest when circumstances are easy. Real discipline appears when circumstances are difficult. The response resonated. People understood that his composure had not come naturally. It had been built over years: combat deployments, leadership responsibilities, personal sacrifice. Difficult experiences had shaped him. Now those lessons helped guide an entire community. Arlington itself continued changing. New oversight policies were approved unanimously. Independent review boards gained additional authority. Early warning systems for officer misconduct received major upgrades. Training requirements expanded significantly. The reforms demanded resources. Time, effort, commitment, but public support remained strong. Citizens wanted evidence that lessons had been learned. By autumn, early results began appearing. Community trust surveys showed improvement. Complaint response times decreased. Public participation increased. Progress remained imperfect, but progress was visible. One afternoon, Captain Monica Walsh finally completed her final investigative report. The document exceeded 400 pages. Every conclusion was supported, every finding documented, every recommendation detailed. At the very end, she included a brief observation. Institutional trust is not lost in a single day. It erodes gradually when warning signs are ignored. Restoration requires equal patience, transparency, and accountability. The statement quickly became one of the most quoted lines from the entire investigation. Months later, universities would reference it. Training academies would study it. Police leadership conferences would discuss it. The Arlington case had become a national lesson, not because the failure was unique, because the response created a roadmap for reform. Yet one final chapter remained unfinished. The federal trial. Jury selection would begin in less than 2 months. Witnesses were preparing testimony. Evidence had been organized. Legal teams were building arguments. For Marcus, the trial represented something larger than personal vindication. The facts had already established his innocence. The question now involved accountability. Could a system prove capable of correcting itself when confronted with undeniable failure? As winter approached Arlington, that question remained unanswered. Soon a federal courtroom would decide, and the verdict would determine how this story would ultimately be remembered. Winter arrived in Arlington with sharp winds and gray skies. Bare tree branches stretched across the horizon like dark lines drawn against the clouds. The federal courthouse stood solemn and imposing, its stone exterior reflecting the seriousness of the proceedings taking place inside. Months had passed since the traffic stop, months of investigations, months of public debate, months of accountability. Now the final chapter had arrived. Inside the courtroom, attorneys presented evidence that had already become familiar to much of the nation. Video recordings, witness testimony, official reports, statistical analysis. The facts formed a consistent picture. Jurors watched footage showing Marcus Bennett standing calmly beside his vehicle. They listened to witnesses describe assumptions made before evidence was gathered. They reviewed records documenting patterns that should have been addressed years earlier. The truth remained remarkably simple. A man had been judged before he had been investigated. Marcus attended every day of the proceedings. His posture never changed. His demeanor never wavered. Reporters often noted his calm presence, but those closest to him understood the personal cost. The arrest itself had lasted only hours. The emotional consequences lasted far longer. Trust, once damaged, required time to rebuild, even for someone as disciplined as Marcus. When called to testify, he spoke with the same quiet professionalism that had defined him throughout the ordeal. He described the traffic stop, the accusations, the humiliation, the concern that sensitive government materials had been mishandled. Yet he avoided bitterness. He focused on facts, responsibility, consequences. The jury listened carefully. So did the nation. After several days of testimony, closing arguments concluded. The courtroom fell silent. Then everyone waited. Hours later, the jury returned. The verdict was clear. Bradley Jenkins was found guilty. Justice had arrived. Not through anger, not through revenge, through evidence, through due process. Through accountability. Outside the courthouse, cameras captured reactions from every direction. Some people celebrated, others reflected quietly. Marcus did neither. When reporters asked for his response, he paused before answering. "This verdict matters," he said, "but the real measure of success will be whether we learn from what happened. Accountability is important. Improvement is even more important." The statement spread across news broadcasts and social media within minutes. It reflected the same values that had guided him throughout his military career. Service, integrity, leadership. In the months that followed, Arlington's reforms continued producing results. Community trust improved steadily. Civilian oversight became stronger. Training programs expanded nationwide. Police departments across the country studied the Arlington case as an example of how transparency and accountability could create meaningful change. Officer Emily Carter eventually became one of the leading voices behind those reforms. Her training programs reached agencies in multiple states. Young officers learned lessons that previous generations had often overlooked. Captain Monica Walsh's investigation became required reading in several law enforcement leadership courses. Chief Patterson remained committed to ensuring the department never repeated the same mistakes. And Marcus Bennett returned fully to the work he loved, serving his country, mentoring younger leaders, helping shape policies that protected both national security and constitutional rights. The black Mercedes that once triggered suspicion continued traveling Arlington's streets, but now many residents recognized it, not as a symbol of wealth, as a symbol of earned achievement. a reminder that appearances reveal very little about a person's story. Years later, people would remember the incident for many reasons. Some would remember the injustice. Others would remember the investigation. Many would remember the reforms. But perhaps the most important lesson was simpler. Character reveals itself during difficult moments. Marcus Bennett could have responded with rage. Instead, he chose dignity. The system could have hidden its failures. Instead, many people chose accountability. Communities could have turned away. Instead, ordinary citizens spoke up. A retired teacher, a young barista, an observant officer, concerned neighbors. Their courage mattered because lasting change rarely begins with institutions. It begins with individuals willing to do the right thing when it would be easier to remain silent. The story of Marcus Bennett ultimately became more than a story about injustice. It became a story about responsibility, about leadership, about the possibility of progress when truth is confronted honestly, and about a nation that continues striving, imperfectly but persistently, toward the ideals it promises. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video.